Hello again. I know that it will have been some time since last I posted, but I was at a festival and I was having a very good time. So I took a bit of more time off. Today we're doing chapter 47, and I'm excited about this one, as I'm excited about them all. I hope you are too. We can only assume that you are, since here you are. So then, wait, chapter 47, 1058. All about him was chaos. There were hordes of warriors wreathed in ghostly, immaterial white flame, fighting with shades of strange, dark nature. They were all fighting on a field? Or was it an island? Or was it the slope of a burning mountain, where tumbling liquid boulders of fire rolled and flowed? There upon the ground before stood a wolf, a destroyer, destruction itself, bleeding and torn from horrific gashes in its mighty muscular limbs by the chain and from the sword that had been thrust through its mouth. The great creature growled low, but the rumbling caused an earthquake. Everywhere there were also brilliant specks of light, the shone that shone in their defiance against the armies of hell. The Aesir did their best on the most awful victories and defeats. There, coiling about the entire battle, was the great hissing shape of the Midgard serpent, as it was struck at by a glowing red light that was itself wreathed in constant lightning. This circle was nothing more than a battle between the very concepts of reality. As before in the Ginnungagap, ice and fire, the primordial opposing forces met to make the foundations of the realms. Now, here did light and dark clash. It was a battle so ferocious and horrible that it must be the end of all things. Apocalypse manifest into one cataclysmic fight. He watched, not as part of it, not an Einherjar who'd fight from the doors of Valhall, or a cursed Draugr who walked with this shadowy slime of hell. He was but an observer to the end of all things. It came as the strangest combination of sadness and utter excitement. This was all as foretold, and he wanted it all to unfold as it was said to, just as much as he dreaded the arrival of each moment. The red flame of fury and thunderous strength would win his fight and then die. There, another form went willingly into the mouth of the great beastly wolf and was enveloped to a death. Then appeared upon the grounds before it a figure who stood 9 feet tall and faced down his father's killer. Vitar, the god of vengeance, stood before the terrifying mountain of a Jotnar that should not be. The wolf lunged, ready to eat again, but as it was foretold to be, he lifted his iron boot and stepped on the jaw, stopping Fenrir where he bit. He held in his hands a spear. Was it the Gungnir? The spear of Odin, famous for returning to his opened hand? The Revenger put his hands up to the top of the wolf's jaw and caught him by the fangs, and then he ripped apart its horrid head. The beast was torn there, and then Vidar lunged too with the spear and struck right into the wolf heart, felling the beast twice for the wickedness it did onto the world. And the spear was therefore returned to the hand as the death blood of the great wolf spilled out onto the land. A giant of fire stepped across the field, tall as a mountain and composed of the smoking flame of the world. The great Surtur readies for his fighting with the fertile Frey. His sword he swings wildly about his head, and his body makes a wide illumination of the battlefield, as the moon and sun have already been eaten by the children of the wolf. Frey would die. They would all die. The darkness would win. The great flame destroys Asgard as he watched. The shining beacon that famed and sought for Hall. All things fell to the death and horrid inescapability of fate. Were the three sisters laughing? They knew. The Allfather knew. All this was foretold. Could a man escape his fate? How could he, if the gods and the realms were bound by the weavings of the webs as well? All things were bound by the threads of fate. all things woven into the unavoidable decay and fall. And yet he knew well that what he saw here was glorious. The whole field was color and light, force and weakness, ordered madness and chaotic arrangements. The specks of light brightened at each death, only growing stronger as he watched them strain against the inevitable end they stood at the door of. The weaving of the Aesir through the islands against the blind oblivion of their foe, wending in a pattern that circled and spiraled and returned onto itself. All the actions and all the destruction here making together a pattern, a combination of good and evil, light and dark, death and life, high and low, fire and ice, shadow and light, wolf and bear. It was the ever-winding strands of these forces that made up reality. Could it be that all of the realms were but constant representation of the woven fate, happening constantly from the beginning and end and redoubling on itself? Is this the fire that keeps alight the whole of all things, the 9 realms, the 9 aspects of human, the 9 stages of your life, the 9 organs of a body? His father asked. What are you doing here? Watching this? What the fuck do you think you're doing here? Are you here? You, my flame, do you contend among those forces down there that hang and balance against each other? The darkness weaving shadow or the flames weaving lightning? It's war that makes the light, Fitbjorn said. It's killing, fighting, hunting, fighting, fucking, feasting, generosity, the lightness of Hugr. It's celebration. I can remember that. I remember this. The virtue the gods praise above all else. Is it? His father asked. Not only those 9 things, but the celebration of them all. The celebration of one's life. This is the thing we show the gods our virtue through. His father shook his head. Not alone. Not only this. Think more on what you have said, what you have done. What is the best expression of one's life? Where is it? Fitbjorn considered. I know it. It is in living. Life against death. The act of living that makes for the best virtue. If that were so, why are there shades down there? Why did I end up in hell? I don't know, he shouted. Are you in hell? If you are, then how can I keep you warmed and safe from the shadows in the dark woods? Think and consider. Seek and delve. Observe what you have done. Reflect. You still warm me in my state. When at last you have accomplished your fate, I may be freed. If you decide that loyalty means to you. And think you well of this, he said, pulling his own axe from thin air. He felt something on his right hip, and his eyes lulled slightly. Yes, father, your axe, my axe. I remember the man who took it so many years ago. He was Harold's man. I will find it. It is tied to my destiny. I wish it was not from the depths of hell you watched all this. But the color and the warmth of such a battle should surely put you onto warmer clime. The sensation on his hip continued as he looked down over the whole of the destruction all before him. Like a churning shoreline of waves that crashed and worked and spun together, the endless ravage at Vigridir, where the tumult of reality came together to end. The feeling in his hip was a stone. He was forced from the dream with the sensation of the stone pressing into him. It wasn't painful, but it did force him from his dream. The warm remnants of it slowly fled from his mind. He groaned as he tried to retain the memory of what he saw, what he'd been witness to. He shook his head, and the rest of sleep escaped him, and he woke fully. Fitbjorn was in bed, in a room all to himself. He felt around for the strange feeling he remembered had woken him, a stone pressing into his right hip. He pulled up the stone and discovered that it was his long curved horn from the night before. Gods, he sighed. What? She asked sleepily. He breathed deep and pulled her tight against him. Sidun was small, far too small to war or raid, but she was so damn lovely. Her thin and diminutive naked body was wrapped around Fitzbjorn's large muscular one, and he luxuriated in the warmth they shared. The bearskin rug was twisted and off them now, and the cool of the night's air coiled in through the openings in the roof that let the smoke out. He leaned forward with a groan to lift from the bed, disentangling from her grip as he went. "What are you doing?" she asked, still in the daze of sleep. He took two fistfuls of the fur and threw it over her. That's good." She pulled the edges up to her shoulders. "Just the fire," he said, though he was now sure that she couldn't hear him. He put another few sticks onto the flame in the middle of the house. It was small, just a room with his bed and a table, but it was his. It had been built and furnished for him as a gift, and he'd been beside himself with appreciation and thanks at the idea of owning something like this. A house that was his. It was small, but it was his. There was a skin on the wall he'd brought back the winter previous with Ragnar and Niels. They'd gone on the 3-week trip into the mountains in search of exactly something like this for their homes. Ragnar and Skadhild had also been given modest houses like this, but he'd won the ox. On the other wall hung the great white bear cloak, his father's cloak, his name. Over this was the smaller shoulder wrap made from the same animal that he wore when it was too hot for the full fur, though that proved seldom these days. The winter was still going strong and wouldn't break for months yet, but they were all glad of a place to winter that was safe and in good company. This was their 4th winter in a row in this unnamed place that Niels' father lived. His horrid mother had died of her poison Huger last year, and for that many were quietly thankful. Fitbjorn realized it was probably midday by now and fought his urge to return to the bed with Sidun. There would be much time for that later. He instead wrapped a cloth around his waist and took his great white cloak, which he wrapped about his shoulders. There was a rich clasp he used to keep it in place, and he emerged into the dark cold outside. The sky overhead was barely lit by the low sun that would glow little, but whose light would still show for an hour each day. The sun wouldn't lift over the mountain tops as they rose high and steep on all sides around the small seaside valley of Niels. He stood in the deep trod snow and looked out over the small collection of houses that made for the village, and then made his way through the path of hard-packed snow he'd walked much every day. He went straight for the wide and empty hut near the center of the houses. Here he took off the white cloak and hung it on a wooden peg outside the door. When he opened the door, he was pleased to see a huge belch of steam plume out from and wash over him. He went in and found that Niels was already sitting there, nothing but a cloth wrap on, relaxing on a bench. There in the middle of the room was a pile of stones. In the wall was a fireplace where one could heat the stones. They would then be removed and river water poured over them to achieve the steam. It was a brilliant investment for the people of the village to construct, and it was magic. The heat of the steam sunk into the bones of a man and stayed there against the cold of the world. "Nameless," Niels said. "Lesant," Fitbjorn replied. They both smiled. "Slept strong?" "Slept long," Niels remarked. "I had a late night. Many others slept long as well. Truly, more will come, as they make." "Meat?" "Yes, that is exactly what I need." "How is Sidun?" "Still not gotten with child. Either one of us is cursed or... No, that's the only possibility. Oh, go easy on her. She isn't meant for fighting." Her frame didn't exactly scream killer of warriors, but she definitely seemed to make concerted efforts to kill Fitbjorn with her nightly demands. He didn't tell this to her brother. "You're awake," said Svein, a 10-year-old boy who entered the hut. "You promised you'd tell me today. Niels, your deer pelt has nearly done curing." Niels smiled at the boy. He was wearing short trousers instead of the simple wrap that the men wore. "All right, laddie," Fitbjorn smirked at the use of Ragnar's word. Some months ago, as you know, it was Fitbjorn and Ragnar and I. The boy sat on the bench and looked at Niels wide-eyed. We three all knew there were herds out in the wild forests by the mountainsides that would all be going ready for the coming colts, Niels said in his full storyteller's voice. We rode out on the road for as far east as we dared before turning into the forest to seek out the fields and valleys that the herds like best. We all had our good and strong bows, and we were ready for the hunt to come. It would be days of trekking, camping, eating rations, searching for water, and more trekking. Beasts such as these are not easy to come by, and so we put into the hunt all of our exceptional knowledge and skill. It was first Ragnar who spied a tuft of hair that might belong to one of the elk we searched after. We immediately set about looking for tracks or clues or anything that could lead us to our prize. Then we reached a plain that was broad and long. The range stretched for so many miles a man could ride for 9 days and not reach the mountains distant. The boy's eyes were wide with anticipation, but he didn't interrupt. The whole plain before us was opened and green with small bits of snow speckling the land. But green enough it was for there to be a whole herd of the reindeer grazing. Still, so great was the size of this plain that we knew it was a day's ride before we could reach them. And so we set off. Ever vigilant were we of other predators about. I wear a black wolf skin cloak. Ragnar wears the grey seal coat, you know. And the white bear here, well, you know what he wears. No matter what other hunters we may have come into in this place, we were the hunters there. Ever ready with our bow and axe for packs of wolves or other hunting men. The mention of axes made Fitbjorn somewhat sullen for a moment. He could not help but to remember his dream. In fact, now the fullness of the dream forced itself into his awareness, and he had to steady himself for a moment and pay closer attention. We rode carefully. We stalked and were not over-obvious with our approach. The reindeer are a wary herd, my boy. It is always best to treat that you hunt with respect. In the chase and the catch, always respect them, or you will fail. This goes with herds and with armies. Fitbjorn nodded and took a drink of the cup of mead. Did you hunt them right away, or did you stalk them slowly and quiet? The boy asked. Niels put his hand out with a flare and a smile. We approached with caution. You see, there's little reason in trying to run them down. Reindeer are far too quick for that, especially on the plains. But you had horses! Listen, the story is mine. No more interruptions. The boy nodded. We dismounted and approached. Lo, horses are fast, but not so quick as the deer when they get bounding. And we didn't want that at all. So we slowly went to the rise of a hill, all three with a bow and an arrow ready to loose. When we rose and shot our arrows far and wide, hoping not to startle the deer too much, the arrows whistled through the air and fell upon the herd, who hadn't seen us yet, and then they landed among them. My arrow took a doe in the leg. Ragnar's hit a young male deer in the chest and felled him instantly. At this point, Niels nodded to the boy, allowing him to talk, for he could see he wanted to. Ragnar's the best archer, isn't he? He asked, excited. Precisely so he is, but this one, White Bear's arrow, though, landed on into the ground. I'm sure the lead deer had left the spot just a second before, he said, grinning to Fitbjorn, who looked back at him with an unimpressed stare. Right. Well, the herd takes off, and the wounded one with the leg is limping away, and Ragnar does me the honor of allowing me the shot, and it took me 2 more arrows, but I felled it. We went to our kills and stood in the field over them. White Bear, a little disappointed, of course. We've come the whole way, found the herd, and only the pair of us catch a kill. But then we turn and Fitbjorn sees a great, wide brown shape roving in the distance. Well, he seems to know right off what it is, and he runs for it straight from where we are. He called after him a moment, but it meant nothing. He runs at a good pace while we get back to the horses and take in our kills. It was a muskox, a great and powerful old warrior bull. Must have been drove off by a younger buck who took the herd for himself. Now, it was the white bear who was going to take the old bull for himself. With him, he had one arrow and his axe. Somehow, from our strained vantage, we could then only see two small shapes and White Bear, why don't you finish off the rest of the story? You know how to tell a tale. Fitbjorn took a long drink from the cup and sat up, sweat dripping down his chest and belly. He cleared his throat. The bull was old. I could see the weather of age upon him. But he was strong still. The proud animal looked at me and saw one last challenge to make on in Midgard. He squared off with me. I could see his hoof stamping, his head swinging. Those horns were thick, and his neck was strong. And so was I. He started to his charge, and I stood there with my bow and one good arrow. The boy was leaning in with total captivation. I drew the bow and waited for my moment. His head was rocking up and down with his thunderous run. Then I loosed. The arrow shot through the air with an angry buzz. I wasn't aiming for the forehead. That's where they hit, you see. And an arrow would do nothing against it. The arrow instead falls from its flight and lands into the spot between the neck and the shoulder, right where I wanted it to go. A shot Ragnar would have been proud to make. Now, it didn't kill him. Not but one arrow. But it slowed him, and I ran toward him, then drawing my axe and throwing the bow aside. I ducked to the side as he ran by, and then I followed in after him, quick as I could. He slows and rounds, trying to get his horns on the other side of me. I grip the horn in my left hand, and then, with a scream, start to hack down on the neck, like this. With my third strike, I broke the arrow, but each moment after I held his horn, he was throwing his head around and trying to jump here and there to hold on. Finally, I put enough cuts into his neck, and the blood was rushing out. When he lay on the ground, the last of his life's bloods flowing out of him, and the last of his breaths huffing into the grass, I put my hands into the blood and wiped it around my ears and down to my shoulders. Then I made a thanks to the Vatir, and then to Odin. He sat back, his story done. Right. And next, we brought together the dead animals and skinned them each. Then we put much of the meat over a great fire and feasted on their blessings to us that night. The big bull, after it was skinned, we put to the wind side to block the worst of the cold. We put up our canvas to make a tent, and then spent the night in satisfied rest. That pelt is hanging in my home now. It warms the wind side just as it did when it was alive. There is still life in it, so long as I am warm with my heat, and it warms me with its own. This is the way of the spirits of the animals we carried on to live with us. How many pelts do you have? Asked Svein. I have 3. I thought you would have many more. I see your shirt that is made from some hide. Yes, but there is a difference between clothing and the magic that is in a skin, a pelt. I have blankets too that are animal furs, but they don't have the same magic in them. I have, of course, my white bear skin that was hunted from with my father. Then there is my gray wolf skin that I delved into the depths of a frozen pond at night, under the watch of a great enemy. And lastly, there is the muskox pelt, that great cloak over me. What is the story of the wolf? I'll say that for another time, boy. He lay his head back and closed his eyes. Another time. Now! I want the story! Fitbjorn's eyes opened, and he slowly looked down onto the boy, who had all the energetic fury and self-importance of adolescence. Done it now, Niels said with a smirk. No! This isn't funny. You do not demand of your elders around you, boy. Not like that. You show respect, he said, standing slowly. I am still talking. You have learned well while all the men folk were away, that you could have all attention paid to you, that you wanted by the mothers who stayed while the stern father was away raiding or hunting. But you better learn, well, how to behave with elders. Respect is the lesson you'll learn now. During his tirade, Fitbjorn stood in the middle of the room, over the stones. He loomed over the boy with his huge frame, and allowed not a moment for the boy's attention to be diverted. The young Svein tried to turn one side to the other, but each time Fitbjorn followed his look, and let no escape. Understood? He asked with a boom. I do, he replied, in a tiny voice, tears in his eyes. Fitbjorn knelt down and wiped the tear away with his thumb. A tear shed in fear before a greater opponent is the response of a child. You are still a child. That is why, for now, this is a wiser answer. But you cannot behave as a child forever. You understand? Yes, the boy said a little louder. Stand! Fitbjorn demanded. The boy looked up in surprise. The moment when you leave behind your childhood has to come eventually. When will yours be? It's the most terrifying thing. To truly leave aside the boy and become a man. To leave aside the girl and become a woman. But it is something that all must do. The boy stood. Fitbjorn towered over him, but he stood to him anyway. Maybe it isn't now. There are other rites to go through before you receive the mantle of your strength. But you stood, and you stand now. I am, the boy replied. No matter what in life you have to face, stand tall and firm against it. Hiding will do you nothing, and running will serve you nothing. If you run, you'll only die tired. Stand and face the conflicts, unyielding and unflinching. That is what it is to be a man. I will. Good, Fitbjorn said. Then he cuffed the boy lightly on the face. Svein turned his head and caught himself from falling, and then when he turned to Fitbjorn, it was not fear or shocked disbelief on his face. It was anger. He nodded. Good! He returned to his seat then, and told the story of searching out the wolf in the frozen pond from under the watch of his great enemy. The night wasn't very distinct from the day. The whole of the world was plunged in darkness nearly all the time. Midday brought with it the light of the sun for an hour, but one thing the darkness contained was the glowing green wisps of light that danced across the sky. In the luminous night, the adults of the village all gathered together and sat in one of 3 large wooden tubs, filled with water and heated. They lounged and spoke, drank and joked, laughed and watched the skies. Fitbjorn sat with Sidun upon his lap, both naked. All were naked. Skadhild lounged with her arms wide out to her sides. Ragnar and Gisle sat together, though he tried to obscure the fact he'd wanted to sit with her. Everyone else, the warriors and the locals of the village, bathed in the warmth and drank their brew. The mead they drank this night was 3 months old. It was made and brewed by Vorund, who made it in the method his father had taught him, the method his mother had taught him. Such it was, going back for 1,000 years of history and knowledge, going into the make of this mead. The brew was considered done after 3 months, though if it were left longer to cure, it would get better and better every month. After 3 months, it was ready, and that was enough to be considered done. As good as Vorund was, he was no master. But the people of this village did not need a master's mead. Vorund's brew was far more than enough. After the second transfer, done from barrel to barrel at the end of each month, they were now ready to try the done mead. Fitbjorn had decided to accept a flat-bottom horn mug instead of go back to his homestead for his curved horn. Til Valhall, och til Odin. He took a drink and looked around at all. This is not good, he said, and he turned to Vorund and nodded. It is what? How can it not be not? Vorund took a drink himself. Then he looked at White Bear with wide eyes. What in God's name are you talking about, laddie? This here is amazing. Gisle took a drink. Niels did too. Sidun took Fitbjorn's mug from his hand and had a sip herself. then started to cough. Cods! White Bear! I think the Scottish is right. This is delicious. What flavor have you put into this? Asked Ingrid. Nothing yet, Voran replied, after taking a large drink. It is but the brew of the beast in the barrel. Why do you say that? Oof, he said, blinking hard. Taste that. The good flavor. Feel that. He punctuated his points with the mug, which he stole back. Strong. Very much so. You feel that. Strong and delicious. After only 3 months. This is not good. Niels laughed. I see Fitzbjorn's words. He means this is a problem to us. We will want to drink fast for the taste, and will become slowed so fast for the strength. You hold a whole drunk in your cups there. I make this a high benefit to you. Vorend? By Thor, you are right. This is the best mead I have ever made. Let it be said then, Nu. Let it be said then, Nu, there, that ye can be settled a master. If this here doesna call you to it, well then, there's never been a master the whole earth lang. Ragnar, experienced as he was, already began to slur in his speech. What will you call it? Asked Ingrid. I never thought I would put a name to some mead. I have an idea for you, Fitbjorn said, taking a drink. Call it Utgard's cat. From the story with Thor and Loki, the cat was not the cat. It was Galter, a trick of the eye to fool the great Aesir. The cat was the great world serpent, Niels said. What was it then? Two, that Thor was meant to do with this cat. Lift it, Niels said slowly, as though it were a trick of a question. And why could not the great Thor himself lift this cat? Because, Voran said, seeing the joke and starting to smile along. Because it was so heavy. Fitbjorn lifted again his mug. Ah, Niels said. Aye, it's a grand old name. I like it. To Utgard's cat, then. They all drank. A little. I have another toast I'd like to make here. I have another toast I'd like to make here, Ragnar said, lifting his horn again. The others all looked at took his lead. This one's for him. For Steffi. Ragnar had been distraught and unable to even say the man's name in years after it was clear he'd been killed on his sojourn to Harold. To Stephanus, a good man, a fine writer, Fitbjorn agreed and lifted his drink. A better cow there was none, Skadhild added. I liked that man, Sidun said. He was a good man. Hated the cold more than any I've ever seen. Ragnar laughed with a tear in his eye. Aye, he's kept warm in heaven now. I'll see him again one day. This one's for ye, laddie. Look on me with joy, old friend. He poured out a sip for the man, and all others joined in this. Harold will pay for it, Fitbjorn said, for all these things he has done, for friends and fortune lost, for everything. For Steffi. Would that he were here for even more. Wealth dies, Niels said in a strong tone. Friends die. One day you will die. You could the high one, Skadhild said with excitement. Cattle die. Friends die. As you will do to follow. But one thing I know that never dies. The judgment of a dead warrior. They grew quiet and solemn then, each thinking on fate, the words of Odin, the memory of Stephanos. I don't know what you said to the boy, Ingrid said into the quiet, but he's been quiet all day. She was Finn's mother, and had known the raiders for years now, as they'd winter in the valley often. He'll come back, Fitbjorn said, but I think he'll be changed when he does. I told him it was time to accept the responsibility of a man. He's young still, she said. I was younger, Fitbjorn said with a grim look. Best not to ask the White Cloak what the fuck that means, Ragnar said. You'll get nae mair of an answer. Tight-lipped as ever, there was a man. Whatever you did, I hope he'll come away and still be my baby. I know that's what you want, but I showed him today that there was strength to take. Much strength that could all be his if he but decided to take it. The same choice we all have. We can all choose to take that axe, the strength, but we have to choose. Even so young, she pleaded, abandon who you were, attain who you can be, keep who you are, refuse the strength. All things are well done if they are honest and done with respect. Niels nodded and wiped his face of sweat. That is well said, White Bear. I like it. Honesty and respect. That's what you showed the boy. Power only comes from Goder Lade. Ragnar was still in his dour, quiet mood for Stephanos' mention. Though all knew it was a good sign that he'd been in place to bring it up. In your faith, maybe. Though our gods and their stories are different. Your god will give you strength if you show yourself worthy. We make ourselves worthy by becoming strong. Yours ask you kneel, ours demand we stand. It's more complicated than that, you ken. My holy book is full of story about someone who needed strength, and it came from within just as he needed. I'm sure it does. All strength comes from within, doesn't it? Not if it's coming from God, laddie. Both can be true. All things are possible through Christ. He sank down in the hot water and turned to his cup. Either way, I think young Svein has seen the presence of real strength. Could do that he'll take on the axe, like I had to. That was different, the boy's mother said. You are very different, and your son could be greater than I. He has to take the power, though. He has to take the power. They all grew quiet and somber in that moment. End of chapter 47. And thank you all for joining me. Love this idea of taking the winter off, having a break of it, being in a place with much snow and steam rooms and tubs and good fine mead. And it's not the world that we live in any longer, which is too darn bad. But appreciate and embrace what you do have. Be thankful for it all and take up the axe. By which I mean the strength. Until next time.